At a winter preparedness workshop at the Public Utility Commission held in October of last year, commissioners asked several presenters if they could bring more resources online by Christmas. Of course, you can't build a big power plant that fast, but small distributed energy resources, batteries, demand response, solar, can be added quite quickly. Still, most presenters said no, there simply wasn't enough time. John Padalino of Bandera Electric Co-op, a member of the Public Utility Commission's Aggregated Distributed Energy Resource Task Force, said he thought it might be possible. This was a pleasant surprise for the Commission. What was even more surprising was that 5 days before Christmas, Bandera Electric Cooperative submitted a one-page filing with the Commission announcing the launch of a battery lease program. Here's a snippet from that filing. Operating under the Energy as a Service model, cooperative members can now subscribe to a service where Bandera Electric provides a comprehensive battery energy storage system capable of sustaining homes during outages. The first subscriptions are now fully energized and able to support the grid and members of the cooperative. After reading this filing and hearing John speak, I invited him to be on this podcast, where we went deep into the details of Bandera Electric's innovative work that they're doing with their members. We talked about the expansion of this work in 2024 and the potential for all cooperatives and municipal utilities to start similar programs. I found this discussion fascinating. I think it's an incredibly important discussion because often cooperatives and other public utilities in Texas are neglected in the discussions of electric market design. But cooperatives, by virtue of having long-term relationships with their customers, have a whole range of opportunities on energy efficiency and other distributed energy resources available to them. I hope you find the discussion interesting as well. The first part of this podcast is available for free. The rest is available to paid subscribers. Please become a subscriber today at DougLewin.com. That's DougLewin. And please leave us a 5-star review at Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thank you very much for being a listener. Have a great day. John Padalino from Bandera Electric Co-op, welcome to the Energy Capital Podcast.
Thank you, Doug. My pleasure.
So glad to be talking with you today. You guys are doing some amazing things at Bandera and can't wait to dive into those. Before we do that, though, why don't you just let's just take a couple steps back and just situate Bandera, because a lot of folks in the audience won't know what Bandera is, where it is. So tell us geographically where it is, what's the size, a little bit of the history. And then where I'd like you to go next, if you don't mind, John, is you have a long history, obviously, working with rural utilities through the Rural Utility Services. I'd love to also just talk about co-ops and how they're different, where their strengths are, where their weaknesses are, sort of how you view co-ops in the ecosystem of energy and power providers around Texas specifically, but the country even more generally. But let's start with a little bit on Bandera as a utility.
Sure. So we're celebrating our 85th anniversary, or as the marketing team says, our 85th birthday. Bandera Electric Co-op was formed in 1938. So, we're a stable, long-standing utility in Texas, and we were formed by the people we serve. The first 9 names on our articles of incorporation were all residents of either Bandera County or our surrounding counties. And so to situate that on the map, we're about 35 miles northwest of San Antonio. So if you pull out your highway map and just follow I-10 west, and we're basically between San Antonio and Kerrville. That would be the kind of northeast end of our service area. So we touch Kendall County, Kerr County, Real on the west side, and we a little bit of Uvalde and Medina down on kind of the south side, and we serve all of Bandera County, and we have a couple meters in Bexar County. So we hit 7 counties. We have service to about 42,000 meters right now, and so some homes have more than one electric meter. So we have about 29,000, almost 30,000 members. So every member might have multiple meters. They might have multiple residences. And the co-op model is 1 member, 1 vote. They vote for the board of directors. We have 9 board of directors that govern the utility, and they are our regulator. So we're in a non-opt-in entity within ERCOT speak, meaning that, we kind of fall on the electric co-op and municipal owned utility side of the regulatory spectrum. And And kind of everything we started was when my boss came on board in 2013 and went out and surveyed the members. And at the time, maybe you were alluding to, tell us about co-ops. And I think the story of co-ops, back in the 30s, these were farmers, ranchers, rural people that didn't have access to electricity. The cities were served. I think New York City probably was electrified in 1870 or something like that. Philadelphia had
Yeah,
electricity.
Pearl Street Station was 1882, and yes, all the
Yeah,
cities by the 30s. So it was a New Deal program, right? I mean, it was
it was a
LBJ as
New
a
Deal
congressman, and
program.
yep, yep, yep,
Yeah.
yep.
Actually, the first administrator of the REA was Morris Cook, and he ran what at the time we would call now NYSERDA, the New York State Energy. I forgot what all the acronyms
Research
are
and
there, but
development. Yep.
yeah,
Hmm. Hmm.
but whatever is the state energy entity in New York. He was, on Roosevelt's staff, came into the WPA as an advisor to Harold Ickes. And then the act that actually gave the REA their first money was an Emergency Relief Act, an Economic Development Act. It was $10 million to do low interest loans. And that was that's how Bandera financed the first lines on its system, was a low interest loan from the REA. There was no grant money. It's always interesting nowadays how much emphasis is placed on grant money, and all the one probably the greatest infrastructure program in the country was financed with all low interest loans that were almost fully paid back. I mean, the default rate on that electric program is like less than 1%, like almost less than a quarter of a percent. And Bandera Electric took one of those loans, built out its lines, and the growth of electric co-ops and Bandera was from the 30s all the way until the 60s, and then there was a huge amount of growth because of air conditioners. And in the Texas Electric Co-op Act, it says that co-ops are authorized to do plumbing, electrical fixtures, that kind of thing. Because most houses in rural areas, they didn't have indoor plumbing. They didn't have a socket to screw the light bulb into. They didn't have switches, anything like that. So, in order to really electrify the countryside, we had to help our members do all of that with their homes. And then the air conditioners came and load increased, and then I think to a certain extent a lot of co-ops and probably Bandera just stagnated. You're providing a pretty basic commodity to people that almost became secondhand, where people didn't think about it. In the 30s, a lot of people thought electricity was magic, and by the 80s and 90s, it's just it's a given, it's a demand, it's where's my electricity, and that's it. And so when Bill came on board, we were selling surge arresters and light bulbs and street lights and things like that, and some old dusty water heaters. And he thought, well, that's all sitting in the mule barn, and we literally had a pack of mules that helped carry dynamite out. If you've been to the west side out near Lakey and Tarpley, there's some pretty deep canyons, and we have spans going across those canyons that literally someone had to climb up those cliffs, put some dynamite in to be able to put a pole up. And the mules, they use the mules to do that. And anyways, he asked the members, what do you want? It's a novel idea to ask your customers, the people who own you, what do you want? And they said, we want access to high-speed broadband, we want renewable energy, and we want options to finance renewable energy. And so we built our energy services, BC Fiber, all based on that. And so we're cowboy country. We're very rural. There's a lot of density around I-10, but as you go west, we have less than 1 meter per mile. But our members, that's what they wanted.
So you are a member of the Aggregated Distributed Energy Resource Task Force, right?
Yes, sir.
A name that just rolls off the tongue. But distributed energy resources, as most of our listeners will know, right, it could be a lot of different things, but solar and storage and demand response, all these resources that are located closer to customers. And I would say I don't think it's unfair to say, well, and frankly, I guess most companies right now that are serving customers aren't offering a whole lot in this space. It's changing fast. But I think that's also true of co-ops. You guys are clearly an exception. You're offering battery storage, you're offering solar, you're offering energy efficiency. I want you to walk us through a little bit from a customer's perspective. And obviously, I think things were changing before that, clearly, as you're describing through Bill Hetherington's leadership and your leadership. You guys were thinking about this before Uri. But can you talk a little bit about the sort of inflection point that was Winter Storm Uri? How that, if at all, I'm assuming your customers were asking more about this stuff after that. How was that experience for Bandera? And then walk me through a little bit. If I'm a customer, I'm a member owner of Bandera Electric Co-op, and I want to have some of these, I want to get my house an energy efficiency upgrade and get renewables and battery storage. What does that sort of, if you don't mind the phrase, that customer journey look like for the customer? What's the
Yeah.
process for them?
Okay, those are a lot of questions,
I
so
do
I'll
I do
try
that.
to.
Sorry, John. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. I guess the first thing I was thinking about was Uri, and just to put things in perspective, um, because the biggest peaks on our load have come over the last 4 years, and they're all during the winter. And I don't think a typical distribution utility, or maybe even some of the wholesale power providers out there, thought of Texas as a winter peaking state. But I think it's safe to say we're becoming a winter peaking state. And I mean, just last week when we were at 12 degrees, 10 degrees, the sag between from pole to pole, the NESC standard is following a 30-degree winter. And so, when you hit a 10-degree winter and that aluminum gets warm, the sag drops a lot and the neutral falls into a primary, and then you get a lot of problems. And so, the whole system has to go through a massive rethink in ERCOT in Texas because of these extreme weather events. And Uri, I think it wasn't necessarily the start of it. I think back in 2011, we had a severe event, maybe 2014 as well. But Uri for sure shook us to our core because in a on an August day when ERCOT's issuing some sort of a energy emergency alert, not necessarily level 1, but a level 3, which means conserve. We're getting tight in capacity at the ERCOT level. We'll maybe peak at 170 megawatts as a system. So we're nowhere near like a Houston or a Dallas. We're very rural. You heard how many members. And so 170 megawatts is a summer peak. At Uri, we were at 280 megawatts. Just last week, we hit 290 megawatts. And so the demand on the system alone is massive at just a very short interval of time at a really high peak. So, kind of managing that is really changing the way, you have to think about things. And yeah, so we rolled into 2021 having launched our energy efficiency program, feeling like we're a pretty progressive utility in general. A utility of the future is what we like to call ourselves because we do offer electric, broadband, and energy services. But even with all of that going on, we weren't prepared for Uri to the extent that, we got the orders from our wholesale power provider, LCRA, they're our QSC, our qualified scheduling entity. And they said, you need to shed, I think it was about 30 megawatts more or less. And that meant we had to put, we have 55 feeders, we have 15 substations, 55 feeders. There's a couple of feeders that, one serves the natural gas pipeline and a compressor station, so that couldn't go into the rotation. A couple others serve some very critical care facilities, and those couldn't go into the rotation. But we put pretty much the bulk of our system, I mean, I think all but maybe 2 or 3 feeders into the rotation, and we rotated every 15 to 30 minutes. And that's important because not everyone did it that way. Some utilities just cut certain feeders for a day. And I think as our members started realizing that, every couple hours I'm going to lose power and it's only going to be for, maybe 30 minutes. We started, we got, of course, got all those calls and saw the Facebook post, but then we started seeing messages because we were telling people in an hour, we're going to cut your power. And so they appreciated that. And, we've always been keyed in on that whole member engagement, really over communicate. And I'm almost 30 years in the utility business. Under promise and over deliver is our motto. And then the Post started saying, hey, our friends to the east on another electric co-op, a really big co-op, they're getting cut for a whole day. Bandera is great. They're really telling us what's going on, enrolling us every so often. And we always met our obligations. And, but it was a tough time. A couple things we learned. I did a presentation as part of the ADR task force that showed, one thing we don't think about as we really think, as we're coming up with the policy and the protocols to launch distributed energy resources into the ERCOT market, is that if you fully discharge a battery, that means you took it down to maybe 20% is left in the battery. And then you have to charge the battery. And so if you're in a URI, that's extended period of time. And so that, within the policy world or the kind of energy research world, that's called snapback. And if you lower or raise the thermostat, it's going to go the other way as soon as you're done with that event. And same with the batteries, same with water heaters, whatever you're controlling, that's going to happen. And we saw, batteries charging at $9,000 a megawatt hour. And, those members, good for them. But everyone paid for that. And so, there needs to be just a little bit more thoughtfulness on all of that. A lot of times, and I've said this at the task force, we're kind of singularly focused on making these products, these resources available within the money market, the ERCOT, market, and specifically ancillary services. But there's these things you do a lot on the grid. And, we built our whole energy efficiency program because our belief is that the grid extends well beyond the meter. It includes the insulation, it includes the water heater, it includes all these things. And so, yeah, you can group them up and sell them into the market, but you also might need to tell a battery not to charge until, prices come down. So you're not hurting other people. And so those were lessons learned from URI. And we knew from our ApolloWare data that one, if we made homes more efficient, that we could manage load. We don't really think everything, I think, in Texas at the legislature. I wouldn't put this necessarily on the utility commission, but some of the reform efforts in ERCOT have been solely focused on supply side. And, we really have to also think about demand side. And, that's what our energy efficiency program's about. And we know if you improve the energy envelope, we're going to make it through a severe winter a lot better. Where we see it's right when it hits about 22 degrees, and so here's Bandera, here's San Antonio. Between those is Lake Medina. And there's a lot of manufactured housing. And this is a lot of Texas. It's not just Bandera, and it's not just the rural areas. You have old homes with little insulation, and they're running on heat strips. And right about 22 degrees, the demand almost goes like a hockey stick straight through the roof. And our ApolloWare platform showed us that data, and so we know we can make those homes more efficient, maybe upgrade the system that's heating those homes. And, those are things we learned from URI. And then we filed comments, and I think it was in one of the DER projects. I can't recall right off the top of my head, but that if we had something like ApolloWare coupled with control at a distribution utility, not just a third party, thermostat manufacturer or battery manufacturer, but if CenterPoint had access to it, if Austin had it, if a co-op like Bandera had control of thermostats, control of resources, maybe there's a more precision way we could do, quote unquote, rolling blackouts, and they wouldn't necessarily have to be a blackout. 1 degree is a big change. If you change every thermostat in ERCOT 1 degree, there's a big amount of energy that you would impact. And that's what we believe. That's what we learned from URI.
Thank you for listening to the Energy Capital Podcast. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, please like, rate, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Until next time, have a great day.